Pleased to welcome Brandon Rahbar from Daily Thunder to talk about what was a great game last night. And I think for a lot of Celtics fans, for a lot of Eastern Conference viewers so far, the Thunder have been a pretty pleasant surprise early this NBA season. And I'm excited to talk about them, talk about their future, and maybe their present. We'll see what this team's capable of this season because they're off to a solid start. But a rough finish in that game last night, Brandon, for the Thunder. That was an ugly end of the third, entire fourth quarter where it was pretty much just a turnover parade. I almost imagine Sam Presti upstairs hitting the tank button and sending that one off because they played so good for 2.5 quarters, and then it just all completely melted down with countless turnovers. Celtics getting 15 steals in this one.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think it's the inexperience and youth of the Thunder. You know, they've been really competitive this season in every game, regardless of the opponent. But I think that Boston crowd was by far the most fiery crowd on the road that they faced so far this season, the loudest crowd. I think that the atmosphere played a part in it. I think that the Celtics being, a championship caliber team, having a lot of vets on the team played a part. And, I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was up to the task. He was ice cold as always, like the good ice cold, not the bad ice cold. Down the stretch, he scored like 10 points in the last 5 minutes. But everybody else, like you said, there's just so many turnovers. It was a combination, I think, of turnovers, the crowd, inexperience, the Celtics just being really good, and then too much Marcus Smart there at the end.
Yeah, obviously an Oklahoma guy himself, growing year in and year out. His growth's been pretty impressive to see the last 2 years here in Boston after, I think, a tenuous couple of years where I don't know if any Celtics fans would have said like a year or two ago, Smart's going to be a Celtic for life. And at this point, feels more possible than ever. I mean, he's gotten better pretty late into his career now, which doesn't always happen. Like guys, usually you kind of know who they are like the first couple of years of their career. And he was in a pretty unique circumstance where he was playing with Kemba, playing with Kyrie, playing with Isaiah Thomas. Like he never really got the chance to be that point guard. Last night, all those outlet passes. He's had this string of great games in November where it's 10 plus assists. He's averaging over 8 per game this month. And he's good in that role last year. It looks like he's moving toward great, especially keeping the turnovers low.
Yeah, I think Marcus Smart is who Thunder fans hope that Lou Dort's going to be one day. Like this premier defender. I think Lou Dort is obviously the trajectory is there for that, but then Marcus Smart has become such a great all-around player. His offense, his leadership, and kind of all the intangibles. So I think that, OKC fans have kind of used Marcus Smart, and maybe a part of it is because he played college ball here in Oklahoma, so there's already kind of a connection. But I think the hope is that one day Lou Dort will be what Marcus Smart is now.
Yeah. So I want to dive into that Thunder roster, all the different guys on it, but we got to start with SGA. Right now, feels like he's going to run away with most improved player the way he's going, over 31 points per game, a ridiculous 37 in this one. A tough defensive assignment in Jaylen Brown too for most of it. And Brown, I think his reputation is probably a little bit above who he actually is as a defender, but still, that's a 6'7" guy, strong build, good agility and athleticism. He's not the easiest guy to score on in the league, and SGA made it look easy. The straight line drives, just going right downhill against Boston's defense. He's at the rim again and again, and guys could just barely clip him as he was getting fouled. I think the jump shot's probably still a little bit of a work in progress with him, it looks like. But in terms of getting downhill and finishing at the rim, he's as good as anybody at this point in his career, it looks like.
Yeah, SGA has been unreal this season. Thunder fans and OKC media, we've known for a couple years now that he was this budding, emerging star. And so it's been cool from this point of view to see it on a national level. Like he's getting that acclaim this year because his numbers, they're just kind of undeniable. He's 31.5 points a night. And like you said, it doesn't really matter who's defending him. It could be an all-world defender and he's getting teams are throwing doubles at him. I know the Celtics don't like to double because Boston has so many good defenders between Brown and Marcus Smart that they can throw on guys. But I noticed even the Celtics threw some doubles at him because he's so hard to stop, because he's got that drive to the paint and he contorts his body. He's so smooth. But then also you have to watch out because he can stop on a dime and clear some space and hit a mid range. Like,
Oh,
he's
he
a
dropped
sniper.
White on that one. I think in the third, he put White on the ground.
Yeah, but and why Derek White's not the first victim of SGA. Like, he's been doing it, a couple times a game this year. Like, his scoring has just been unreal, and especially the efficiency he's been doing it at. And what I think sets SGA apart even is his teammates, because he doesn't really he's doing it with the least amount of space, because defenses aren't really respecting his teammates right now. So teams, like I said, are throwing doubles at him. He's facing all these double teams, and he's still getting his, and he's doing it really, really efficiently. I saw a stat, he's scoring 17.1 points in the paint this year. In the last 25 years, only I think Giannis, Zion, and LeBron, I think, or somebody else, but no guards. No guards have scored that many points in the paint in the last 25 years. It's crazy what he's doing.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the contortion of the body, the points in the paint, how much he's doing in that area. It makes you think of Ja, and Ja's gotten all that acclaim for doing those things, rightfully so. But you do watch SGA, and it's almost kind of the exact same, probably a little bit different, but the exact same formula in terms of getting downhill, using his speed, using his athleticism, embracing contact around the rim, all the different things that have made Morant a superstar in this league at this point, MVP conversations. Of course, he's made the playoffs and had a solid run so far. That's probably the next thing SJ is going to have to check off the list as he grows in his career. But those two, I think there's a lot of similarities between them, and there's probably a pretty good formula for SGA to become one of the big stars in the league. But you look at the guys, and there's a handful of guys more than usual, averaging 30 points per game to start this year. Scoring's way up. But he's not getting the acclaim some of those other guys are. Pretty much all the other guys are. I'd say like he's probably the most underrated of all of them. And I guess it's just where Oklahoma City's at, the market. I know you guys are a little bit used to that, but really just them being in this rebuild, he's ahead of schedule, and the rest of the team's kind of trying to catch up here. And it's kind of sent him under the radar, even though the stats are just ridiculous. I mean, he's kind of doing what Tatum's doing right now, statistically.
Yeah, his stats are nuts because it's not obviously the offense is what pops, but defensively he's averaging over 2 steals a game and 1.5 blocks per game. Like, guards don't do that. He's bringing it. I've seen, actually, it's funny you bring up Tatum because I keep reading over and over, like, are these the top two-way guys this year? Like, as far as like bringing it offensively and defensively, Jason Tatum and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, they might be the top 2 guys right now as far as two-way players. The SGI I think he's a really, really special player. He's still just 24 years old. And I do think that once the Thunder, are back in the playoffs, and I think SGA is going to make it happen sooner rather than later. I'd say next year maybe you might see a push, and we'll probably talk about that. But I do think that once the Thunder are in the postseason again, that's when the acclaim will start coming. I'll be surprised if he doesn't make the All-Star game there this year. I mean, I think his numbers are just too good to deny. But it's a loaded West. There's a lot of guards in the West between Luka, Steph, Dame, Ja, Booker. So, there's 6 spots possibly going to West guards, but I feel like SGA deserves it.
Yeah, and I'm interested in where their trajectory is going here. I mean, I don't want to overreact over a couple games, and they obviously lost the one to Boston, but you see them beat the Raptors by 19, really stick it to the Knicks on Sunday afternoon. And that was a game I think more people were able to watch, a Sunday afternoon game, even though it was on, I think, NBA TV or League Pass, wherever it was. But they're building a little bit of momentum on this trip. They won 4 games in a row earlier in the year. Their defense is quietly top 10 and gave the Celtics offense, which is number 1 by and far to start this year, some issues. throughout this game, whether it was Pokashevsky inside or SGA along the perimeter. Some of the other wing defenders really impressed me there. This is a tough one, right? Like, this is the year. It's Victor, all these great prospects. It's this awesome draft. And we know that the Thunder love those picks and it's stacking up all these prospects. And you don't have Chet Holmgren, and you probably want to be patient with this a little bit. But at least early on here, it looks like this team is eager to make a little step here. At least SGA, at least some of the veterans like Dort, Giddey's in year 2. He's probably got a little bit more growth to see here. But there's a few guys on this roster who you look at and are like, all right, they're probably ready to make this step. Like, could this team creep toward that 10 seed, that play-in tournament? And, you can lose and still end up in the lottery there, but you're in that weird place where you're like, all right, can this team kind of sneak battle in for a playoff spot? What's the benefit of that versus being in the mix for Victor Wembanyama and some of the elite prospects at the top of this really hyped up draft?
Yeah, it's a big debate actually among Thunder fans. Like, half OKC fans want to see the Thunder make a push for the play-in and try for a playoff spot. The other half just want to absolutely tank and try the best to get Wembanyama or Scoot to go along with SGA and Chet Holmgren and Josh Giddey. And I think that Chet not being healthy this season, there's so much excitement adding Chet Holmgren, the number 2 pick, who a lot of analysts thought was the best player in this draft, to go along with Shai and Giddey and Lou Dort. But, losing him this season felt like, okay, at least one more year, let's get a top prospect. But like you said, the Thunder have been more competitive, I think, than people anticipated. And, if the Thunder would have held on and beat Boston yesterday, they'd be 500 right now. Which is crazy to think about coming in. And they played a top 10 toughest schedule so far to open the season. And really, they've been in every game. Really, only the Bucks game on the road was really the only game that the Thunder haven't been in. Other than that, they've all been really close, competitive losses or close wins. So I do think that there's an excitement here for the Thunder amongst Oklahoma City fans. But if you polled 100 fans, probably 33 would say completely tank, 33 would say make a push, try for the play-on, and the other one, 33 would say, hey, let's just see what happens. Just play and see where it goes.
Yeah, and the tough part is they don't really have that. I'm looking at their roster yesterday at the Garden and even coming in this season, and they traded Derek Favors. They made that weird, really the weirdest trade I've ever seen. Favors and a bunch of Rockets guys, and they're just like, let's flip all these players just to save $1 million on the Houston side or Oklahoma City side, whatever it was there. So a bunch of veterans end up going out of the building. I don't think this team really has sturdy. I guess you could say Dort, right? Because he's been in the playoffs. He went with Chris Paul, SGA to some degree too. But I'm talking like an Al Horford. And that's obviously who they gave up in the trade last summer. Kemba Walker comes in. He doesn't end up playing for Oklahoma City, and they end up kicking that pick into the future. So the approach from the front office still seems pretty forward-facing here, especially when you think of drafting a guy like Chet, who's probably got a little bit more, growth to be seen in front of him, even before the injury, which really was a killer to watch. I would have loved to have seen him with this group early on.
Yeah.
But you look at this roster; they're still so young, they're still so raw that it's going to be tough even if they do want to kind of make that push toward the playoffs. Like, I don't think a team this young, they're the youngest team in the NBA, right?
Yeah, they are the youngest. Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't think that would probably be pretty historic seeing a team like that make a playoff push, which is fine, right? Because it is that elite draft this year. You still have time here, but it's tough just because there's a few guys on this roster who look ready. Dort, SGA, Giddey came in ready. Like that's an incredible pick looking back on it. But then you have like all these other guys who you're questioning when they're going to be ready. It's just such a young group so early in their development overall.
Yeah, it really is. I think ultimately where it'll land, I think that the Thunder will want to get one last top 10 pick. And then next year with Chet coming back and, another year for all these young guys to develop and season and grow together, you add a top 10 pick, you add Chet, and then maybe next year is when you make the push. I think that's ultimately, like you said, it would be really, really surprising if this young of a team made it. The X factor is just SGA has gotten so good. There's like kind of like a baseline. They're not going to be as bad as the Rockets or the Magic or those teams at the bottom, just because I think SGA is just that good. So as long as he's healthy and playing, I think that this Thunder team is going to win some games that people probably don't expect, be competitive in a lot of games. But towards the end, I think that they'll probably end up adding a top 10 pick, and then next year you'll see more of a push.
They're going to have to sit down SGA again like they did the last 2 years. And I almost wonder, is there any regret seeing what Horford's done in Boston? They're sending him out and sitting him down that season. And because when I mention a veteran, that almost seems like the perfect guy that they're missing. They're certainly missing a center when I look at their roster after trading Favors. That's probably the next guy that they're going to have to look to get there. They traded that Şengün pick, which kind of stinks looking back at how he could probably fit with this roster of young guys up and coming. But I don't know. Would Horford have fit in with this group, you think, for years into the future? Because he did look solid early that year. They were winning games with him when he was playing.
Yeah, the Thunder were like a 500 team with Horford and SGA, and they played really well together. And I think that kind of set kind of the template as far as like the kind of center that you want playing with SGA, because they're pick and pop, and Horford providing that space for SGA, kind of like bringing the big out of the lane. I think that they'll get that with Chet. Chet was like a 39% three-point shooter in college. So if you can get some of that Al Horford defense and shooting with Chet as a 5, that opens things up so much for SGA and for Josh Giddey, gives them an outlet. But yeah, no, Horford was great in OKC, quite honestly. It was funny because when he was with the 76ers, all we heard was how washed he was. He was done. And, they had to pay the Thunder these picks to take him. And then he comes to OKC and he looks great. And he was such a cool guy, like such a good interview. I ended up kind of becoming friends with his sister. She came on a podcast.
Yeah.
So I like the entire Horford family while they were here. Al's just class act all the way. So I'm happy for him. I think all Thunder fans are happy for him. But yeah, would he be? I think if you added Al Horford to this team right here, SGA as good as he is now, and then pieces like Giddey and Dort and some of the other guys, I think that they absolutely could be a play-in team. I really do.
Yeah, and that's the only reason I say that is because I think it's going to be tough to do it without one. And you hope these guys grow together. You hope you hit multiple young players at once. And maybe that's the formula now in this kind of tanking lottery era over the last 10, 15 years that we've seen here, starting with Philly, that a bunch of guys do come up at the same time. And it was difficult for Philly. They obviously have a little bit more in the way of resources, but they missed so many of those picks. They hit the big one with Embiid. And Oklahoma City looks like they found their big one via trade, which I do want to look back on that trade a little bit too. But I feel like you need a good veteran to kind of go from having promise to actually making that push. And it was Chris Paul for this team a couple of years ago who was able to bring a group of SGA. There were some more veterans involved in that run when you think of Adams and Gallinari and some of the other guys that were on that team. But Paul's arrival was really what made it happen. And you almost want to replicate that trade again, I think, when they do eventually decide that they want to win here and mesh some really good young talent with a veteran who has been to the postseason and knows how to rack up wins through the course of the regular season. Like, that is the story of last night, right? There was just no one who could stop the bleeding. You couldn't go to anyone during that flow of turnovers and be like, shut this down right here, make a big basket and cut off this run and, escape with a win. And it just kept bleeding and bleeding until the Celtics were in almost full control with a few minutes to go there.
Yeah, I think that when the Thunder are ready to make a push, like I think when Sam Presti thinks that the supporting cast around SGA, that meaning Chet and Giddey, Lou Dort, Trey Mann, Jalen Williams, Ousmane Dieng, all these young prospects, the Thunder, Pokashevsky, who's improved leaps and bounds, like he's a whole other story. Poku is like a completely different dude this year.
I know. I didn't know who I was watching yesterday.
Yeah, it's been impressive. Like, even Thunder fans are shocked. It was so funny when he was drafted. Everybody said, "Hey, he's a raw project. Be patient with this guy. He's the youngest guy in the NBA." After the first year, everybody's like, "This guy, get him off the team. He's trash." And here we are. What do you know? He's still 20 years old. Only 2 years later, he looks like a real NBA player. He's making an impact every single night. It's crazy. He's shooting well from three. He's blocking shots. He's like 12th in the league in blocked shots. But yeah, all that to say, there's all these young guys, and some of them will pan out, some of them won't pan out. But I think the idea is when these guys are ready to compete, they'll go out and get a vet. Like, they've shown that they can trade for guys like Chris Paul or Al Horford, who are supposedly washed but have plenty of traction left. Like, Chris Paul was great here. Al Horford was great here. If you get a guy like that to go with this young team, I think that you'll see it could be a really, really fun team here in Oklahoma City here in a couple of years.
And that's the key, right? Fun. And I'm interested in, like, you're obviously interacting with fans, readers all the time. Are they enjoying this? Because I remember back in 2013, 14, I don't think people enjoyed that year so much, the losing that first year after the big three got traded and, that era in Boston ended. But the year after got a little more fun. You had some promising guys that fans attached to. And then the year after that, they make the playoffs. They're one of the middling teams. And it happened fast for the Celtics. It's still pretty early on in this process for Oklahoma. It's crazy to think that that playoff run was only 2-3 years ago now during the bubble. But are fans enjoying this? Like, are they liking the process of latching on to some young players, the promise? Because I almost feel like that's more enjoyable than what the Lakers are going through right now, where, yes, they've won a championship, but now it's like, all right, you got to find a way to do it again. And there's no patience for young players or development or picks or any of these things. Like, it's just really all about finding a way to the top, and it's boom or bust.
Yeah, it's funny. Expectations are so funny. Like, when the Thunder were a title contending team with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook all those years, every loss was excruciating for fans, for the fan base, with expectations. And then, every offseason worried that, is KD going to leave? Is he going to, is Paul George going to want to stick around? Is he going to want to leave? So with this young team, there is an excitement. There's an excitement to see SGA kind of rising to stardom. There was an excitement when they got the number 2 overall pick and ended up being Chet Holmgren. There's an excitement about Josh Giddey. Everybody said that was a bad pick, and then he ended up being one of the best rookies last year. So seeing a team develop and grow and all these young guys, and so every night the fan base is being treated, because you're either seeing these really close competitive wins, which is really exciting for the future, because you're like, hey, they beat Toronto. This youngest team in the NBA beat Toronto, and they don't even have Chet Holmgren. Or you get a really close competitive loss to Boston, who's a title contending team, and you're like, hey, they almost beat Boston on the road on the second night of a back-to-back, and that's a few more ping pong balls for Wembanyama or Scoot Henderson. So it's kind of like a win-win every night. You're either getting a win in the win-loss column, or you're getting a loss, but you're getting more ping pong balls for this generational prospect. So yeah, fans are really, for the most part, really, really enjoying it. Obviously, there's always going to be fans who want to see them in the playoffs right now and miss the days of KD and Westbrook and James Harden and title contending and don't want to wait it out. But by and large, I'd say most of the fan base is really enjoying this experience.
Yeah, I would be, and it's nice to see the Celtics get to this level now where they're almost a model for other teams. And there's been a couple coaches who've come through, and Mark Daigneault really hit on it, that they're trying to model themselves after the Celtics to some degree. I think a lot of teams are looking at what they did in terms of meshing young talent, up and coming guys like Brown and Tatum with some good veterans, as we just talked about, and getting them good experiences, and then eventually seeing them morph into the faces of the franchise themselves. And I think the Thunder have a pretty good chance to do that. We've obviously seen teams try to mimic what the Celtics did with the Nets, getting multiple picks back and being able to use those to find their next franchise pieces. And the Thunder certainly did that with the SGA trade. And I was thinking after last night's game that trade was something when you look at what it did for both sides. Like, This is probably a case that might have been the most fair trade in NBA history because it didn't work out the way the Clippers have thought so far, but George is still playing at such a high level. They still have hope if Kawhi Leonard can get healthy of winning a championship with that group they have together right now. And in terms of like a prospect coming back with what SGA's become, that's that you couldn't have dreamt of a better, you can get a pick that becomes that, but in terms of another team giving you a young guy who becomes what he's become, that's really good. And that's as big of a feather in Presti's cap as you can think of with what he's traded and gotten back through, about a decade with the team or so now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it was a win-win trade because, the Clippers got Paul George and Kawhi wasn't going to sign there if they didn't get Paul George. So they got, Kawhi and Paul George. Who knows if it's going to work out as far as like winning a title or not. But for the Thunder, hands down, win. Because, like you said, they got 5 first-round picks, 3 swaps. Getting Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, like you said, I think he's going to be an all-star this year. He's only 24. He's playing like a top 10 player in the league right now. And, when you're rebuilding, the whole goal is to find a player like that. And you don't know if you will. You can get draft pick after draft pick and miss. You can have a number 2, 3, 4, 5 overall pick, and those guys don't become as good as SGA is right now. So to already have SGA, this is, 13 games into year 3 of a rebuild. So to have a budding star and then all these picks on top of it, I mean, that trade was truly franchise altering for OKC and really set up this rebuild. And it's what makes this, the future so bright for the Thunder. It all goes back to that trade. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's amazing what one guy can do. I mean, he made them look so good last night if we want to shift over that game. Like everything just goes around him. He's finding Jalen Williams. I thought Jalen Williams looked great in terms of catching and shooting and just making good decisions once the ball got to him. You had a bunch of different guys. Poku, as you mentioned, preventing shots inside, really giving Jason Tatum issues at the rim as well as any player, maybe save for Jared Allen and Evan Mobley so far this year through their schedule. Like he was just frustrating Tatum in there. That's the best way to put it. Like you saw him complaining for calls and like just throwing his arms up in the air when Poku was moving inside and contesting his looks in there. And there was even one play, I think, to start the fourth quarter where he blocked him, took it end to end and scored a layup the other way. Couple plays where he's putting back his own shot. There was one where I completely lost track of him. And all of a sudden I look over the right and he's at the basket after missing the shot, throwing it down off his own miss. I haven't seen that this year from a guy. Twice or 3 times in this game he did that. So you were talking about him earlier. I didn't love him coming into the league. I didn't like the build. He looked a little slow and rigid. Now there's more of a fluidity to his game, I feel like. The shots improved. He's a good playmaker. He's getting a couple assists, secondary playmaking out there. And then the defense to really make an impact without still great brawn or great size, great physique. It's really impressive. And if he can build some muscle on top of what he already has in terms of skill and positioning and all these different things, that's a guy. I don't know if he's one of your stars, but he's certainly a guy that can be a complementary piece.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. If Poku turns into a complementary, solid rotation player, that's a huge win for the Thunder. They picked him at number 17 overall. And you weren't the only one. A lot of people didn't like that pick because, he was so gangly and thin, and he was so raw coming out. He played in a league, a division overseas, like the competition, like a lot of people, like analysts said it was like playing like pick up at the Y. So nobody really knew how good this guy could be. And that first season was rough. Like there were so many like shots
he was bad.
on the side of the backboard, passes that were thrown to like the 4th row of the crowd. But his court awareness and IQ have done a 180. He just looks like a different player. He's put on 20 pounds in the past 2 years, and you can see it like, physically when you look at him, but you can see it on the court and how he plays. He's just a smarter, better player. And he's still younger than half the rookies in this year's rookie class. I mean, so the future all of a sudden looks pretty bright for Poku. Even if, like I said, I don't think he's going to become a star, but I think that he can be, a solid 8-9 man rotation guy on a playoff team, and that's a huge win at the number 17 overall pick for a guy that was supposed to be so raw.
So in terms of the Celtics last night, it's getting impressive what they're doing right now. And yes, it's the Thunder. They come back against a bad team that they should have beat. But they were trailing for a long time, and they were frustrated, and they were down and out. The defense wasn't there. The shot wasn't there. They shoot 27% from three in this one. And this team that's so dependent on the three-point look, they're shooting about half their shots from three. They don't have it in this game, and they still find a way, whether it's transition, whether it's forcing turnovers, offensive rebounds, Peyton Pritchard coming deep off their bench and making some plays. This team is just levels, and, the defense needs to come back around, but they're levels above last year's group, which was a really impressive group in terms of confidence, assertiveness, flow of game, situational awareness, and just, I think, the ability to find a way to win games night in and night out when they don't have it, when they're down multiple guys. Malcolm Brogdon misses this game. I'm starting to get really impressed, and they've had some good games early this season. Even though it's the Thunder, this was about as impressed as I've been with them in terms of being able to work their way back methodically in a game, get production from different guys across the board, and still have a pretty dynamic performance between Brown and Tatum, even on nights where they're not shooting that well.
Yeah, this Boston team coming into the season, I had Boston and Milwaukee in the Eastern Conference Finals. I thought that those were going to be the two best teams. And I think it's a great combination of youth and experience, like we talked about. I think it's a great combination of offense and defense. The team plays both sides of the ball. And, you have two young stars. And Tatum, he's ascending even more. And it's crazy how young Tatum is. Like, it feels like Tatum should be like 28 years old. So it's nuts to me that he's as young as he is. And then Brown, like, you have such a good 1-2 punch. But then you got these guys like Marcus Smart, Al Horford, Malcolm Brogdon. When those are got your 3, 4, and 5 guys, the depth is so good and there's so much talent. And again, almost every single one of these guys are two-way players, which is huge. So many of these NBA teams, when you get to the playoffs, you need guys who play both sides of the ball. And I've seen it as the Thunder, observer, media person, and fan. Katie and Russ would play both sides, and they were superstars. But a lot of the bench guys were either three-point specialists, but they couldn't defend it all, or they were great defensive specialists like Andre Robertson, but they couldn't shoot it all. Boston, it just seems like all your guys can play both sides, and that's why going into the season, I had them and the Bucks, because I think the Bucks are much the same way, going to the Eastern Conference Finals, and it's why it was the first time I was like, hey, if the Thunder lay an egg against Boston, second night of a road back-to-back, there's no shame in that. Like, I honestly was really impressed with the Thunder for sticking around like they did and making it as competitive as they did. But that's just because I respect Boston a lot and how good they are this year.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And they've gotten deeper when you think of some of the guys that they've developed, like Luke Cornett, Sam Hauser, who wasn't great in this game, but had been pretty great to start this year. You had a lot of guys stepping up deep off their benches in this game. And I know you were intrigued by the Thunder starting lineup as they've gone through some injuries here. And it's good to get a good look at them and some of the guys deep off their bench. I mean, that roster, you start getting into it, and I actually heard a player in the Celtics locker room saying, like, there's some guys on that roster, like first and second year guys. It's just like, who is that?
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of guys. That's the thing with this Thunder roster. When you have this youth, and there's a lot of second round picks, there's some undrafted guys. They're just like, it's like dart throws. When you're rebuilding, get rid of like all the kind of like meh guys, like kind of just like get all the high upside guys who might end up being a player. And that's what they're doing. Like probably outside of Oklahoma City, not a lot of people know Jeremiah Robinson Earl or Aaron Wiggins, but they've been really solid young pieces so far for this Thunder team.
Yeah, I've heard that Robinson Earl almost has like Grant potential to him in terms of how he plays and
Yep.
what they could project him to eventually be in there. And then Wiggins had that throwdown last night. I saw
Yeah.
that all over Sports Center. That's gonna get him noticed.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And that's the thing. This young team is just like every night somebody, like Trey Mann may go off for 25 points and hit 7 threes, or Aaron Wiggins has this crazy putback. Like every night, Shea's bringing it every night. Usually Dorton, Giddy, but they have all these high upside young guys that are contributing, and it's a high IQ, totally bought in, team oriented youth core, and it's exciting on this side of it. I think here in a couple of years, this can be a fun team to watch.
For sure. And here at Dome Theory, we'll pay some bills real quick before we wrap this one up. I appreciate Brandon being here with us for episode 98. We're inching toward 100 this carnation of the show. And of course, we love our sponsors here, The Garden Report and CLNS Media, Athletic Greens, a big one, athleticgreens.com/garden. They're throwing in 5 free travel packs of their powder with vitamins, minerals, adaptogens, probiotics, and more. All available with a year's supply of vitamin D. This is the time to get your body, all the nutrients that it needs, whole food sourced to battle winter, to battle the cold weather. I know it gets cold in Oklahoma too, not just Boston up here in the Northeast. So you got to be able to battle that. athleticgreens.com/garden. Give yourself the boost, energy boost, and it tastes great. Just throw in your water every morning. Take it back, and you get all of those different places. It's all in one with Athletic Greens, athleticgreens.com/garden, as well as the Com app, com.com/garden. Gets you 40% off a premium subscription when you go over there. That's sleep sounds, meditation, a little bit of something for everybody to help them relax. And you'll get their entire library for 40% off when you get a premium subscription over there. So what are you looking for next with the Thunder? I know they were a little banged up. We didn't get to see Mann. We didn't get to see Baisley. They didn't do an extension with Baisley, which is, a lot of guys around the league didn't get extensions. This class actually got more than you would think. I think 11 guys ended up getting extensions out of this class. I haven't seen a ton from Baisley to make me think that he's going to be a significant force in this league, but he's shown spurts at times. My big thing with him, I'm a Syracuse guy, so that day in March 2018 where he decommitted and went to – he didn't even go to the G League. He went to an internship here in Boston at New Balance. That was a tough day for Syracuse fans everywhere because I thought he probably would have been something at the college level. He was great in that Jordan game. Overall, though, he's been solid to start his career, and I don't know if he's a big part of what the Thunder are doing into the future, but didn't get to see him in Boston this time around.
Yeah, it's funny because he didn't get that contract extension, and last year was probably his roughest year. He was pretty solid that bubble year with Chris Paul. But then this year has probably been his best overall year. He's gone to the bench. He was starting, but he's on the bench now. He's been really solid defensively, blocking shots, rebounding. He's kind of changed his game. He's been more efficient. He's not taking these high volume threes, defended threes. He's only shooting when he's open. So whereas at the beginning of the season, I think that most Thunder fans thought that, this kind of might have been his last season here in OKC. I think he's playing himself either into another contract with OKC or being traded somewhere else. But I do think that he's upped his value. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means in OKC or somewhere else, but I think he's playing well enough to be in a rotation somewhere as a bench defensive gadget player.
Yeah, and you got a couple of young coaches here on both sides of this one too. I didn't know much about Daigneault coming in. I knew he was from Massachusetts. I knew that he took over for Billy Donovan. He did some work in the G League. He had a great quote pregame that really had the room laughing when they were asking him about why they won. I think they were the best third quarter team coming into this game, and they asked why that was, and he just goes, halftime speeches, and the whole room just started dying. Yeah, so I didn't know much about him. In terms of everything you're saying about this team and the steps they've taken, feels like he's doing a good job from a developmental standpoint. I guess you'd expect that from a guy who was leading a G League squad there. But do you think this is the guy that's going to lead this team into the future?
Yeah, I've been really impressed with Daigneault. I had, questions about Scott Brooks and Billy Donovan. There was good and there was bad, obviously, with both guys, both good guys. And Daigneault's the same, really cool, funny, personable dude. Which I think, as the Thunder, when they start getting to the playoffs again, you'll see him more, which will be fun because he's got a real kind of snarky, funny attitude. Really young guy too. But I do think his development and getting all these young guys to buy in, and the fact that they've been like a top 10 defensive team without a true center and being the youngest team in the league, and their turnover rate is one of the best in the league, again, as the youngest team. I think a lot of that is the players, but a lot of that is the coaching as well. A lot of that points to coaching. So I've been really, really impressed. It's one thing to develop a team. Scott Brooks was a good player developer, I think, as well. We'll see when the Thunder are competitive again. But right now, I've been really, really impressed with Mark Daigneault.
Yeah, and that's another thing I'm going to be watching for in the league in the next couple of years is guys like that. Missoula having great success early on with the Celtics, and he's obviously got a lot more to work with. You got Will Hardy out in Utah off to this fantastic start. There's some young assistants who had kind of been working behind the scenes for a little while, varying levels of experience, but they all seem to be having some good success early on, and makes you wonder what the value of coaching, what players respond to now, and how that position on a team is going to be shaped into the future, because your Thibodeaus and your Rivers and all these different veterans around the league are really having trouble right now for some reason or another, and everything's situational. But I had Sopan Dev on here at the beginning of the season when Ime Udoka got suspended, and it's like, oh man, what are they going to do? He was so crucial to the run last year. He changed the culture here, all that. You got this guy coming in who doesn't seem to have a lot of head coaching experience, but it's another young coach who's just having this immediate success. And a lot of the stuff you say about Daigneault, I see that in Missoula, some of the, quick, quippy lines. He's willing to let these guys play a little bit, and, institute a free-flowing system that benefits a lot of these guys' skill sets. And he's not really on them the way some of these veteran coaches are. So I'm very interested to see where coaching's going in this league in terms of like who is going to be along the sidelines now, because it seems like those days of like the NBA veterans who have like these big personalities and are really getting on guys and screaming and yelling and drilling all these little details and benching guys, like those days might be in the past sometime soon.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I hadn't even thought about that, but it does kind of seem to be a new era that's being ushered in with all these young coaches, and the style is different. I hadn't really thought about that till just now, but I think you're on something. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on Brandon's coverage. Doing a great job out there covering the Thunder. It was great to kind of read up on some of his work with the Thunder coming in here and following him throughout the game yesterday. Celtics and Thunder will meet some point later in the season. Hate that you can only see these West teams a couple of times a year, but always good when they're able to come into town. You can follow him at Brandon Ratter, just as you see below his name there, Rahbar. He writes over at Daily Thunder and the 107.7 Franchise Sports out in Oklahoma. Brandon, great to meet you. Great to talk to you. Keep up the good work, and I appreciate you being here on Dome Theory.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Bobby. I had a good time. Keep up the good work as well, bud.